One of the weird things about at least the history of L5R, not necessarily just 5th edition, is that there is a certain element of PvP that becomes frequent. You are in your clan, another person at your table is in another clan, and your clans are fighting each other. And so now it's one player versus another player. Or I don't know if you've heard, you probably have, of these things called winter courts that AEG had, where there was like massive numbers of players would do a months-long RPG, essentially competing each other on behalf of their clans. What is your feeling about translating or making 5th edition work, just PvP in general, in role-playing games and specifically for 5th edition?
So I have a couple of things to say about this. First of all, I want to really drive home how important a session 0 is. Just regardless of the role-playing game that you're doing, you really need to sit down with your group and talk about what kind of game that you want. Or do you want a game that's really heavy in PvP, or do you not want that? And trying to strike a balance there. And I think L5R is really interesting because there's actually just two different kinds of PvP, right? There's PvP where you're like literally dueling each other, hopefully not to the death. And then there's the PvP where you are working together, but you're also working against each other. And I think that specifically for L5R, it makes such interesting stories. And so I'm in support of that. I think that if you have role players that can pull it off, that are seasoned, I think that makes awesome stories. But also, it's awesome stories if all of your players are working together and they don't want to oppose each other directly. So, I don't know. I really like that about L5R specifically. Max?
In general, I think that, I don't know, PvP is tricky. I think people like the idea of PvP more than they actually like PvP. Like, they like the idea that their lion and crane characters could kill each other, but actually they're going to work together and then become friends, because it's like way more dramatic and like inspiring if they do become friends in spite of that difference, rather than if they actually kill each other. So it's one of those interesting things where I think this is part, but not the entire reason that there's so much interest in the fan base in like the dueling minigame, and so many people get super wrapped up in that. And I don't think that's a bad thing by any stretch of the imagination. I'm glad people are engaging with it. I wrote it to be interesting. But I think part of the reason for that is because it really feeds that fiction of the bonds of friendship that exist in this fraught, difficult system where everyone is opposed to each other are that much stronger. I think it's a little bit like how people are with their characters dying. One thing that I think is super interesting about L5R and its history is that past editions of L5R often made it easy for your character to die, asterisk. They made it easy for your character to die, but then they gave you a meta currency that made it impossible for your character to die. And so it creates this dynamic where it looks like your character can die. Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay does the exact same thing. But actually, your character can't die. They literally can't if you have a void point to spend or what have you, and to avoid death. And so the whole like, oh, katanas are always one-hit kills home rule isn't really the rule. The rule is katanas cost one void point to avoid, essentially. But the idea of that home rule is inspiring to the imagination, and people love the idea that, oh, my character could have died at any time, but instead my character survived this whole deadly campaign. And I think that there's a brilliant design lesson in that. And then it's that I don't fully know how to articulate it, but it's this brilliant combination of like loss aversion and resource management and imagination. But I think it's important to note that at the end of the day, people don't really want their character to die most of the time. They certainly don't usually want their character to get hit by a random arrow in session 1 and die undramatically. I do know a few people who actually want that. I'm not saying there aren't people who want that. I know people who like that, but I don't know many.
Yeah. The biggest problem is that when that happens, then your betrothed takes over the Lion Clan and starts taking over Crane Clan.
Yes, that does have a tendency to happen.
Honestly, I found it very interesting that especially the earlier editions of L5R were really all about, it's such a deadly game. Oh, it's the deadliest game. And like you say, if you've got void points, not so much. But that was a big part of the advertising and the feel of it. Let's move topics onto L5R campaigns. So this is not just one single scenario, but what do you see as the general length of the campaign for you? Have you ever got up to level 6 or beyond?
I personally have never gotten a group together for long enough to play a legitimate rank 6 campaign. Like, I've obviously tested characters and played in development-wise, like rank 6 and stuff. Usually my games only get up to rank 3, maybe. How about you, Max?
So I've never run a rank 1 to rank 6 campaign. I've run campaigns at all ranks. I think I've had characters get to rank 5 from rank 1. I was giving them accelerated experience to try to test things more, so I think that was like 12 or 13 sessions. I've run longer campaigns where the characters actually didn't progress as much. I change my experience a lot based on how much I want the characters to be growing, based on what I want to see out of them, based on the motifs of the story. If it's a campaign, the 1999 school drama campaign I ran, that campaign, so that was like one semester. I think it was like 12 sessions or 13 sessions. I think they only got to like rank 3, maybe at the bottom of rank 3, because it wasn't that much time in universe and they were students. So like they weren't going to progress that much. So it just depends on the themes you want and the sort of like style of campaign you want.
Yeah, exactly. I think L5R is pretty flexible for that too. I think you can have fun at just about any rank, and that's really good design. So good job, Max.
Thank you. I definitely did assume that most of the game would be played between rank 1 and 4, and that games that got to rank 5 or 6 would be uncommon. And I think that's true observationally.